Hi folks, welcome to Ethereal Mechanics General Topics. This is a series of videos for Ethereal Mechanics that does not fit into the normal paper. These are additional or addendums to the paper writing flow. And today we're going to talk about nature's generators. Okay, as you recall, I mentioned that atoms are nature's engines. Okay, and that our objective is to find a way to load the engine down to produce coherent power. And that's how we're going to produce amazing amounts of energy. And it's not going to be free energy per se. It is going to be tapping into the ether being the fuel. Okay, after I made this, I came up with the epiphany that there are generators in nature that are already occurring. Okay, but let's remember the objective. The objective is to load down the engine to create a generator to produce power. Remember the properties we talked about. Okay, these generators, each little one is going to be at the size or at the size at or near the scale of atoms. Each is going to produce a tiny effect, which is good because it can't be weaponized and all that other stuff. And because it's millions or trillions of tiny little ones, okay, they're going to have to arrange in series or parallel in some configuration to generate a useful amount of effect at the human scale. In other words, at the scale that we need to get work done. Okay, and it dawned on me that nature already produces two forms of generators, natural generators. And that'll be our ability to know that this is in fact doable. One of those are permanent magnets. And the magnets, when you magnetize a material such as neodymium, the outer electrons of the material, not all of them, but a significant number of them, are oriented in the same rotation. And so all these tiny little magnets make the effective magnetic field of a large magnet. Okay, so they're working together, tiny of them are working together to produce a larger effect, an effect at the human scale. Now you says, well, how do you know this is consuming fuel? Well, let me give you an example. So over here we have our permanent magnet. Down here we have a steel plate. Okay, if I release the steel plate, the magnet's going to draw it up against the force of gravity, and this steel plate's going to attach to the magnet. So that magnet has done work. Now I can manually push this plate back down and release it, and the magnet's going to pick it up, and I can do this over and over and over again to infinity. And every time I release this plate, the magnet's going to pick it up and work it against the force of gravity. Over here is an electromagnet. As long as the electromagnet has power, it'll do the same thing that the permanent magnet will. Okay, this one requires power to do the same thing this one does, which suggests that this must also be powered. Okay, you can't, otherwise you'd have a violation of conservation of work and energy if, in fact, this just worked for magic and this required power. Now, here's where a physicist would say, aha, you didn't consider the example of the superconductor. Well, let's do that. Here we have a superconducting coil of whatever the superconducting material is, and it's in a shell, so you can flood it with a cryogenic material, because when you have to cool superconductors down before they get to zero resistance. Now, I remember when I went to college, they said it wasn't really exactly perfectly zero, but if you look at the literature today, they say it's exactly zero. Okay, I take the literature with a grain of salt. Okay, but for the sake of argument, let's just say it is truly, in fact, zero. Okay, well, that would mean then that we could put a current in this loop and then connect the two ends together and just let the current run in the loop forever and ever and ever and ever and ever, and it will never lose energy due to resistance, which I don't believe. I believe it will eventually, even if it takes 100 years, it's eventually going to lose its energy. Okay, but the important thing is it's producing a coherent magnetic field. So it's radiating a field. It's creating a coherent field. That can't be for free. Okay, so even if we don't lose energy from resistance, which would be admitted as thermal radiation, we should most certainly lose energy because we're emitting magnetic radiation. Okay, but let's, for the sake of argument, let's assume that the classic physicists are right, that magnetic fields are static phenomenon, and then once you produce it, it doesn't take any more energy to keep a magnetic field going. Okay, let's just keep going down their rabbit hole, because it really doesn't matter with the one I'm about to show you. Okay, so assume we got a current running in this. We charged it once, we got the current up to speed, and then we shorted together the lead. So now we have a permanent current running in this magnet. Okay, once we release the steel plate is going to be drawn up by the magnetic field. Once this magnet does work to pull this steel plate up against the force of gravity, the current in this loop will reduce because it has done work. Okay, now, if I physically push the plate back down, the physicist says, you're going to put the energy back into the coil by pushing it back down. And that's where they're almost correct. Yes, by pushing the disc back down, that'll couple energy back into the coil. But it won't be 100% the amount of energy that was needed to lift it. Okay, no transfer of energy is exactly 100%. And because this is steel, it's not going to be 100%. Steel is not perfect. It's not even a superconductor. Okay, so every time I let this rise up and I push it back down and rise it up, push it back down, eventually that will wind the energy down in this coil to zero. Just like a battery, when you keep doing work with a battery, it'll eventually go to zero by doing the work, because no transfer of energy is 100% efficient. Okay, so even in this case here, energy is going to get lost. And that way there, the only way we could keep this going is we have to replace the lost energy. And this means that the permanent magnet has to be using fuel, has to be consuming fuel to maintain its constant static magnetic field. It cannot be a perpetual motion machine. Okay, and therefore the permanent magnet is my first example of a machine that is drawing energy from the ether to produce a coherent field, energy that we use. And the more stronger the magnetic field of a magnet, the more ether the magnet must consume beyond just its normal consumption to maintain its shape and its form. The second one is the electrophorus, or I don't know how to pronounce it, electrophorus, I don't know. What that is, this is the electrical equivalent of a magnet. Once you charge up the base, it'll maintain that charge indefinitely. But of course, like a magnet can corrode, a magnet can be damaged, a magnet can lose its stuff because of other extraneous damage. An electrophorus has its things too. If you pour water on it, you're going to ruin it. But electrophorus, basically you can create electrophorus from styrofoam. Okay, early they came up with one made of wax or paraffin, but you can make one today pretty much just out of any kind of polymers and plastics. There's a lot of online stuff. They're pretty interesting to look at. And I have an old recipe from an old book for creating one of these with beeswax, which is supposed to be pretty good. I might end up purchasing the materials just to see how good it is, in fact. As a side experiment, not to get in the way with the normal Ethereal Mechanics progression. Okay, my friends, so that, my friends, is nature's examples where nature is actively loading down an engine to produce coherent work. Okay, and what we're going to have to do is, once we get past all the other issues and learn a lot of other items, we're going to have to come up with a mechanism for creating very tiny machines, probably with nanotechnology. It might be many years away. It probably will not be done by me. It'll probably be done by a company that, once my theories, if these theories are correct, that is, get accepted, and people start realizing this, then the companies all over the world will start figuring out how to make these things, and hopefully, that will be the end of our problems with regard to energy, yada, yada, yada. So the ability is out there. Nature's already doing it. We just have to master it and figure it out, yada, yada, yada. So thank you for my Patreon folks. We'll come back to this topic when I figure out something else out about it, when I get another epiphany on this topic. And this new realm of videos, which will just be odd topics that are related to ethereal mechanics. Well, not related. They are part of ethereal mechanics. They just don't fit in any of the papers or the progression of papers going forward. So these are kind of like addendum topics. Thank you very much.